primetime star Bill O'Reilly have paid out to 5 different women in settlements since 2004. According to reporting in the New York Times, each of the women reported sexual harassment or other inappropriate behavior from O'Reilly.
The network would not say if O'Reilly has been disciplined, but it has reportedly renewed his contract to host the #1 program on cable news. Joining us now to talk about this, Eric Wemple, media critic for the Washington Post, who wrote a scathing article on these revelations. Eric, thanks so much for being with us. So how closely, Fox, the Murdoch family, how closely are they staying tied to Bill O'Reilly right now? And then the question I think everyone in every workplace is asking is, can you imagine another company where someone could do what he's alleged of doing and keep his job?
No, I can't. This is an exclusively Fox News phenomenon. This sort of conduct has been condoned, allowed, winked at for 21 years almost at this particular network. And Bill O'Reilly is uniquely employable at Fox News.
You reached out over the weekend to O'Reilly's legal team because they are threatening legal action due to what they say happened to his reputation because of this reporting. Did they get back to you? Did they say anything? What's their case here?
Well, they wouldn't repeat the statement that they made to the New York Times, which is that they are considering legal action to shore up Bill O'Reilly's reputation. My point is that he's almost libel-proof at this point. His reputation has taken so many legitimate hits that there's not much to salvage at this point. I mean, we're talking here about 5 women alleging sexual harassment or mistreatment, settlements that are sort of quiet and so on and so forth. This man is an awful, awful man who has done this repeatedly. And that was just what I view as a piece of legal thuggery, and it bears, it doesn't really merit much attention at all. It's just, it's just trying to, I believe, suppress coverage of this incident.
What would shake the Fox resolve here? Any sign that advertisers might pull out? Any sign that viewers will somehow take it out on Bill O'Reilly? Because I'm not sure we've seen either of those things happen ever.
No, well, we saw it with Glenn Beck a long time ago in 2010, 2011 timeframe. But the thing that I would note here is that Bill O'Reilly came under very, very fierce criticism in 2015, legitimate criticism. He appeared to have embellished or perhaps even lied about his reportorial past in many conflict zones. What happened there? He was able to tar those people that were criticizing him as far left goons and villains. And that by doing that, I think he made himself stronger. It will be interesting to see how we go here, because if Bill O'Reilly and Fox News are able to tar these people criticizing him for these events as far-left villains, he'll emerge stronger.
And will he address it tonight on his show? We'll watch and wait and see. Eric Wemple, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so moments from now, Supreme Court pick Neil Gorsuch faces a critical test of vote that sets the stage for a very heated week on Capitol Hill. You're looking at a live look at the Senate Judiciary Committee.
On the right there, that's live for sure.
For sure, they're coming on in. We'll bring you those openings. Now on Capitol Hill, President Trump's Supreme Court nominee getting ready for the final hurdle before his Senate confirmation vote. Today, Neil Gorsuch has to clear the Senate Judiciary Committee. You look at all the senators gathering there. This should begin at any moment.
Yeah, the big drama this week is what happens if Democrats are able to successfully filibuster this nomination. Can they get 40 Democrats to try to stand in the way? That means that Republicans would have to go nuclear. CNN's Sunlen Srifati on Capitol Hill to set the stage. And, I do expect we will see some drama here today, Sunlen.
That's right, John. The drama starts right now where you have the Senate Judiciary Committee at this moment gathering to meet. This is a committee vote. Democrats have the minority in the committee, 9-11. So in all likelihood, Neil Gorsuch will get out of the committee today just fine. And that sets up the true showdown later in the week once Neil Gorsuch is considered on the full Senate floor. Of course, a lot of questions over this filibuster, a lot of questions over the so-called nuclear option. But heading into that dramatic moment near the end of the week for Neil Gorsuch, check out this rhetoric from the Senate Majority Leader and the Minority Leader.
Judge Gorsuch is going to be confirmed. The way in which that occurs is in the hands of the Democratic minority. And I think during the course of the week, we'll find out exactly how this will end. But it will end with his confirmation.
Why doesn't President Trump, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate sit down and try to come up with a mainstream nominee? Look, when a nominee doesn't get 60 votes, you shouldn't change the rules. You should change the nominee.
Now, the state of play in all this, the math is extremely important here. As of now, it looks very likely that Gorsuch and the Republicans will not get the 60 votes that they need to break that Democratic filibuster. Yes, there were 3 Democrats who recently came out and said that they will support Neil Gorsuch, but that is far short of the goal that Republicans and Gorsuch needs, the support of Democrats to end that Democratic filibuster. If that happens and if that sticks, which in all likelihood it very well will, John and Poppy, that would force Republicans and Mitch McConnell to enforce the so-called nuclear option, which would change these long-standing Senate rules on the books for a long time. So it has some serious implications up here on Capitol Hill. John and Poppy.
Absolutely. It would completely change precedent going forward for these nominees. Sondland, thank you very much. So let's get a closer look at what's ahead this week for these confirmation hearings. Ariane DeVoe is our Supreme Court reporter. She joins us from Washington. So we heard from Neil Gorsuch for some 20 hours just a few weeks ago. Now he'll go through committee and then to a full vote. The nuclear option, I think, no question at this point it'll be used, correct?
It sounds like that's the way they're going. This committee is going to meet at 10. He won't be present, but the members here will deliver remarks. We expect Gorsuch to advance out of here at the end of the day, only because really there are more Republicans than Democrats. But the debate today could get a little bit fiery. The Republicans, they're going to defend and praise Gorsuch, but the Democrats have these concerns. First of all, they're still furious about Merrick Garland never getting a vote. They call this a stolen seat. They also think that Gorsuch was really evasive in some of his answers during his testimony on things like gay marriage, corporate issues, campaign finance. And then we'll also hear from that ranking member, Dianne Feinstein, and she's going to target women's health issues. Remember, Donald Trump, he said during the campaign that he was going to put pro-life judges on the bench. And the Democrats, they felt like that gave them license to ask Gorsuch more about issues such as Roe v. Wade, and they felt like he didn't answer them. He evaded them. Here's the most important thing. This could be the first step in changing the way the Supreme Court nominees are chosen, and that's a big deal for the Senate, but also for the Supreme Court.
Ariane DeVoe for us in Washington. Again, you're looking at live pictures right now from the Senate Judiciary Committee. This meeting gets underway very shortly, and they will vote, presumably today, and Judge Neil Gorsuch will get through this committee before getting to the full Senate later in the week.
So as we get ready to hear from Senator Chuck Grassley and also Dianne Feinstein, Senator Dianne Feinstein, as they're sitting down, let's bring in our panel. CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin, CNN Supreme Court analyst Joan Biskupic, CNN senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson, and CNN contributor and Washington Post reporter David Farenthold. Nice to have you all here. We are going to bring those opening statements as they begin, so forgive us if we do need to jump in. But Jeff Toobin, just set the scene in terms of history. Is this a particularly nasty battle?
It's nasty, but it is enormously significant. You know what's going to happen in 2040? 2040, Tiffany Trump and Malia Obama are going to be dueling for the presidency, and Neil Gorsuch will still be on the Supreme Court.
These have 30-year consequences, which is why we're actually going to dip in and listen to Senator Chuck Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, in his opening statements right now.
Associate Attorney General. I want to explain how we're going to proceed. In addition to the Supreme Court nominee, we need to report out the nominees for Deputy Attorney General and Associate Attorney General. We all understand that it's important for the Department of Justice to have senior leadership in place. My intention is to have everyone speak on the judge and then vote on his nomination. Then we'll turn to Rosenstein and Brand. I'll have a statement on both of them that I'm going to put in the record so we can keep things moving. Regarding the judge, for the most part, everyone has already indicated one way or another how they intend to vote. So there isn't a whole lot of mystery about how this is going to go at our committee meeting today. But regardless, everyone should have an opportunity to explain their vote so everybody can speak as long as they want to. But my hope is that members can try to keep their remarks within 10 minutes so that everyone can speak and we can proceed in an orderly way. Now I speak, then I'll turn to the ranking member. Today, we're considering the nomination of Judge Neil Gorsuch to serve as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. Over the last couple months, the nominee's opponents have tried to find fault with him. That fault will not stick. And of course, we've seen that it just hasn't worked. Before the President made his announcement, the minority leader of the Senate declared that any nominee must prove himself, in his words, mainstream to get confirmed. Well, that test ran into trouble the minute the President selected the nominee. He was confirmed to the 10th Circuit 2006 by unanimous voice vote. In the 10 years since, his record on the bench has proved that the judge falls well within the mainstream. He's participated in 2,700 cases. He's voted with the majority 99% of the time, and roughly 97% of those 2,700 cases were decided unanimously. Two of his former 10th Circuit colleagues, one was a Reagan appointee, one was a Clinton appointee, remarked upon, and now I quote them, his fair consideration of opposing views, his remarkable intelligence, his wonderful judicial temperament expressed to all the litigants, and his collegiality among colleagues, end of quote. So you get words like fair, remarkable, wonderful, collegiality from people that have served with him during that period of time, some appointed by Republican presidents, some appointed by Democrat presidents. Then you wonder what the uproar about him is all about. Legal commentators across the political spectrum have recognized that he's mainstream. Even Rachel Maddow, who isn't exactly a conservative, said the judge is a, quote, fairly mainstream choice that you might expect from any Republican president, end of quote. Once it became clear that Judge Gorsuch is mainstream, opponents then moved the goalposts and set a whole different test. Any nominee of President Trump's, the minority leader said, must prove that he is independent. Of course, there's no debate on this question either. The night that, let me turn my phone off here.
That's a good idea.
The night Judge Gorsuch was nominated, President Obama, Solicitor General Neil Katyal, I think it's pronounced, wrote a New York Times op-ed entitled, quote, "Why Liberals Should Back Neil Gorsuch," end of quote. Mr. Katyal argued that one basic question should be paramount. Quote, is the nominee someone who will stand up for the rule of law and say no to a president or a Congress that strays beyond the Constitution and the laws? Question mark, end of quote. Mr. Katyal answered his own question, quote, I have no doubt that if confirmed, Judge Gorsuch would...
We have a panel here. Former George W. Bush political director and chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp, is with us, CNN political commentator Anna Navarro, and CNN political commentator, Democratic strategist, and senior advisor for Priorities USA Action, Paul Begala. Nice to have all of you. Obviously, we weren't expecting all of this breaking news out of what's happening with St. Petersburg. We'll keep an eye on that. But Anna, of course, it just calls into stark attention. The world is a complicated and dangerous place, and this week, President Trump is going to be addressing a lot of it. I'll pull up the schedule. Today, he's meeting with Egyptian President El-Sisi. Wednesday, he has King Abdullah of Jordan. And then, of course, Thursday, Chinese President Xi. Thursday and Friday, we should say. What do you think is going to come out of these meetings, Anna?
Look, it's hard to say what's going to come out of these meetings, right? But we see that the international community is flocking to the United States to meet with President Trump. I think a lot of them, frankly, to learn about him because he's a new protagonist on the stage, on the world stage. People don't know much about him or what his real base of knowledge or policies are. But I think what we're seeing today, whether it's the natural disaster happening in Colombia or the explosions happening, the deadly explosions happening in Russia, reminds us all that countries need real leaders. Countries need leaders who at times of crisis can step up and be presidential and be unifying and be the consoler in chief for a country. And I think President Trump really needs to work on that. It's important that all of us have a president that we think we can trust and believe in a time of national crisis.
Paul, obviously Democrats do not think, and many of them, that he is equipped to deal with this level of things. But what he says and what the White House says is it's time to shake things up, and he's going to do things in a more unpredictable manner, and maybe that's good on the world stage.
Well, it's not just Democrats. If you look at the polling, independents, it's favorable among independents, is in the 30s. This with an unemployment rate of 4.7%. Not 10% like Barack Obama, who, by the way, was much higher in the polls with 10% unemployment than Trump is with 4.7. And I pick up on what Anna said. First, my heart goes out to people in St. Petersburg. It's just a terrible tragedy. This president, thank God, in his 70 or so days, has not really had any massive external. Thank God there hasn't been an earthquake. There are theyese terrible fires in the Midwest. They're killing ranchers in Kansas and some of the neighboring states, and I do hope our government does more to help those guys. But in the main, we have, thank God, not yet in these first weeks of the Trump presidency had a crisis, and yet he seems unequipped to handle the day-to-day stress without cracking. And so, look, I want my president to succeed. I really do. I'm not Rush Limbaugh with Obama. But he doesn't even handle the day-to-day well, and I tremble when I think what's going to happen when we have a real crisis.
Matt, what do you think is going to happen this week?
I think the big meetings are the meetings with the Chinese leader. I think we have massive problems, obviously, with North Korea on the Korean Peninsula, but also we have these major economic questions, and so much of the economic questions with China kind of morph into questions of national security. But I think what you're going to see from the president is doing what he's done in all these areas. I think he's going to do what he said he was going to do, and I think he's going to hold China to a tough line. China has taken advantage of the American worker in countless ways, and I think Donald Trump is going to make it very clear that that day is over.
And what does that mean, Matt? Because what leverage does he have against China?
Oh, lots of leverage against China in terms of our, I'll give you one example. Currency manipulation. China is a known currency manipulator, as are other Asian countries, and I think he's going to make it very clear that he's not just going to rubber stamp these questions. I think also on the question, I think all types of ways in which our countries deal with each other economically through trade relationships, I think as well. I think he's going to make it very clear that he wants reciprocity. He wants fairness.
Okay.
And so I think, look, I think it's a critical meeting, and I think the Chinese are realists, and I think they're going to be listening.
Anna, how's that going to go?
Look, I think it's going to be, it could be. It's got the potential of being a fairly good week for Donald Trump. He's going to be standing next, shoulder to shoulder with some major world leaders. He's also probably going to get his Supreme Court justice nominee out of committee and, going to get a vote. Neil Gorsuch is going to be confirmed. The only question is how much pain will it be? Will it be a little pain, or will it be extremely nuclear type pain? Now, if Donald Trump can only resist the urge to tweet stupid things and get into fights with little people, big people, world leaders, and domestic partners, department stores, plays, anchors, if he can only resist that urge and maybe be disciplined for 7 days, he might have a good week, coming off of a terrible week where, his folks are getting investigated for ties to Russia, where he had a horrible defeat on health care, where he's fighting with everybody, Democrats, Republicans, and everything in between. So, maybe if he can be disciplined and stick to message and stick to what they put in front of him, sign the executive orders instead of fleeing the room like a cat who just saw a big dog, maybe he can have a good week.
Paul, Anna, Matt, thank you. We'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much.
All right.
When President Trump's Supreme Court nominee faces a key Senate committee vote, it's the same morning he's about to meet with the leader of a key Middle Eastern nation. It's the same week where he sits down with the Chinese leader to talk about trade and issues that include possible nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula. But what is the president doing this morning?
Well, he's tweeting this morning, and he's tweeting about Democratic primary debates. Seriously, the president tweeting, did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers to the debate? Just asking. You might remember Donald Trump won the election. You also might be asking this morning, how does that tweet help one single American? Just asking. That aside, it is a huge day in Washington, so let's go to Ariane DeVoe, our Supreme Court reporter, for the latest on what will happen today with these Gorsuch hearings.
Well, actually, it's a big week for Neil Gorsuch, right? The Senate Judiciary Committee will meet at 10, and at this point, it's all about the math, right? So far, there are 3 Democrats who say they will support Gorsuch, but he needs 60 votes for confirmation as things stand now. There are 36 Democrats, led by Chuck Schumer, who say, look, they will filibuster. But listen to Mitch McConnell from this weekend, who responded to that.
That Judge Gorsuch is going to be confirmed. The way in which that occurs is in the hands of the Democratic minority. And I think during the course of the week, we'll find out exactly how this will end. But it will end with his confirmation.
Why doesn't President Trump, Democrats and Republicans in the Senate sit down and try to come up with a mainstream nominee? Look, when a nominee doesn't get 60 votes, you shouldn't change the rules. You should change the nominee.
The debate today, we should see a little bit of fire, right? Because the Democrats have concerns. First of all, they're furious that Merrick Garland never got a vote. They say his seat was stolen. They say that Neil Gorsuch had evasive answers during his hearings on issues such as gay marriage, corporate rights, campaign finance. And we'll also hear about women's health issues. The Democrats there, they feel like Donald Trump, before and during the campaign, said he'd put on pro-life judges. So they felt like that gave them license to ask Gorsuch about Roe v. Wade. And they felt like he never really properly responded. John and Poppy, this could be the first step in changing the way Supreme Court nominees are chosen for the years ahead. It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. Ariane DeVoe for us. Thank you very much. Again, this hearing is kicking off in less than an hour, and it's expected to bring fireworks. We'll bring it to you live when it begins.
All right, joining us now, the senior senator from the state of Utah, Orrin Hatch. He is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Hatch, thank you so much for being with us. You heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell moments ago. He said it over the weekend, saying that Judge Gorsuch will be confirmed. The implication there is, if you need to, you're going to invoke the nuclear option. That means no more filibuster for Supreme Court justices. Is this a move you would support?
Yeah, I would support that move. I would hope that we wouldn't have to do that. It would be the first time the Democrats or anybody had forced us into a vote on cloture. And frankly, it looks like they're going to do that. And they're politicizing this whole process. And why? On a man like Gorsuch, who you know, has agreed with the liberals on the Circuit Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, my circuit, 99% of the time. I mean, this is a guy who's a mainstream conservative, which they hate. They don't like that, and of course they're still upset about my other friend, Merrick Garland. And but the Republicans had every right to delay that during a presidential year, which the Democrats would have done had the roles been reversed.
Well, that has left the 9th seat on the High Court open for 400 days and counting now.
Right.
Let me just get your take on what this means, though, because, Senator, as you know, if you do invoke the nuclear option, that will mean that that is precedent, right? And the next time that Republicans aren't in power and the Democrats are in power, it gives them a wide open lane to have a nominee that is much more left-leaning, much more radical. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, that's right. Well, what else can I be? All I can say is that we can't let them just stop one of the best nominees ever nominated to the Supreme Court, because they're far left constituencies are screaming and shouting, and that's really what's behind this. They just don't know how to handle them, and so they're, instead of standing up and saying, look, he's a very qualified nominee, they won the election, we should at least allow an up or down vote, they can't seem to do that. They don't seem to have the courage to do it.
Senator, but they look at you and say that's a double standard. I mean, you call Judge Gorsuch one of the most qualified judges ever be nominated. You're a friend. Almost everyone said the same thing about Merrick Garland, including you. So there seems to be a double standard. There seems to be a double standard where you're saying it was all right last year when we, for political reasons, halted the nomination of Merrick Garland, but it's not okay this year when Democrats try to halt the nomination of Judge Gorsuch. Why is that not a double standard?
I'll just tell you straight out, that's total BS of what you're saying there, because I can't go back in time and show you any case where during a presidential election year they've allowed a Supreme Court justice to be nominated unless both sides agreed, and both sides didn't agree on this. Now, Merrick Garland, he's a fine fellow, there's no question, a fine judge. He's a friend of mine. I went down personally to his chambers to chat with him about this, and frankly, it was every right of Senator McConnell and the Republicans to say we're just not going to do this during the presidential year. And at that time, keep in mind, it looked as though Hillary was a sure winner, and we would have gotten an even more liberal judge than that one. But that was a stand on principle, not some new barbaric thing that some have tried to make it.
But there's never been a Supreme Court nomination that was held up on an election year 8 months before Election Day. There have been Supreme Court nominees that were confirmed during election years. Again, all I'm saying...
Yeah, but that's when everybody agreed. That's when you had bipartisan support for them. And frankly, there's never been one of this type that has been allowed to go through. Now, to be honest with you, the Republicans acted properly within their procedural rights. I think they did it properly, and even though I like Merrick Garland personally, I think it was the right thing to do. It looked as though Hillary's going to win. It looked as though he'd be automatically going.
Senator,
well, it was the right thing.
Why was it the right thing to do to not even hold it? Hold on. To not even hold an up or down vote 8 months out from an election. We're not talking about 8 days or 8 weeks. To not even have the voices of your fellow senators heard on this one. Why was that right then for the American people, and what the Democrats are trying to do now not correct?
That's what democracy is. Democracy says that you can hold a vote or you don't have to hold a vote. I was willing to go ahead with it, but to make a long story short, the Republicans acted fully and wholly within the rules, and I think did so properly. It looked as though Hillary was going to win. It looked as though she could either reappoint the judge or Judge Merrick Garland or pick somebody else. But in all honesty, Republicans acted totally properly in that particular matter. It just so happens that Trump won, and this really outstanding man named Gorsuch has been the nominee. You'd have to look long and hard to find a better nominee for this court than Neil Gorsuch. And frankly, if you look at his record, it's across the board. Yes, he's conservative, but he voted 99% of the time with the other judges on what really was a liberal-dominated court.
All right, we are out of time because of the breaking news. We're going to have you back and ask you about those comments you made about Mitt Romney. We'll get your answer to that one coming up. Thank you very much, Senator. Nice to have you.
You can hear his passion. If Senator Orrin Hatch uses the phrase BS, you know that it's something...
You're no BS in my book, John
Those are not words that often come out of the mouth, I think, of Senator Orrin Hatch, so we appreciate his being with us.
I think you're right. Candid conversation this morning, that's for sure. All right, still to come for us, we are, of course, on top of the fast-moving developments in this deadly blast in St. Petersburg, Russia, that has taken at least 10 lives and injured 50 more. Also, forget Twitter diplomacy.
The president meeting top international leaders face-to-face, actual sit-down meetings with key foreign leaders. Plus, the Senate Intelligence Committee, behind closed doors, beginning its process of investigating alleged ties between Trump associates and Russia.
President Trump kicks off a critical week of diplomacy, meeting face-to-face this week with 3 foreign leaders. In just a few hours, he will greet the president of Egypt. On Wednesday, he sits down with King Abdullah of Jordan. And then on Thursday, he will host Chinese President Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago.
And President Trump is putting pressure on the Chinese leader ahead of this meeting. In an interview with the Financial Times, the president said, if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. CNN senior White House correspondent Joe Johns at the White House. Joe, any sense from the White House how they will solve North Korea?
No sense, at least right now, but it's pretty clear from reading into what the president has had to say about it. If China does not participate in the solution, the United States will go it alone. But look, a very busy meeting, a very busy week of meetings. for this president, including starting today with the president of Egypt appearing here at the White House later this morning. A variety of things, no doubt, on the table, the partnership against terrorism, as well as military aid for Egypt. Not likely that they'll talk in any great degree about human rights, which was a big concern for the Obama administration. Then on Wednesday, the president will be meeting here at the White House with King Abdullah of Jordan, and Thursday and Friday at Mar-a-Lago with President Xi of China. Of course, a very tricky meeting there, given the president's rhetoric on the campaign trail relating to China. It is pretty clear also that the president wants to talk about trade as well, but North Korea certainly will be near the top of the agenda items. Back to you.
All right, Joe John, to the White House with all of that. Thank you very much. All right, let's bring in our panel. CNN political commentator Patty Solis-Doyle, CNN political commentator and Republican strategist Doug Heye, and we are awaiting David Gergen, who will join us shortly. Thank you guys very much for being here. So it's a huge week, as we saw those three leaders that he's meeting with, the key meeting arguably being Thursday with Xi Jinping. But he's not tweeting about that this morning, and he's not, Doug, tweeting about Judge Gorsuch on these, this confirmation week. Here's what he's tweeting. Did Hillary Clinton ever apologize for receiving the answers to the debate? Just asking.
I don't think that's going to come up with Xi Jinping.
I don't think so. And I'm just asking, how does that help one single American, Doug? What do you make of it?
Well, I think it does help one single American, Donald Trump. It means that he can steer the conversation to wherever he wants it to be, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense to you or I. And so we know that if the meeting with China doesn't go well, we'll probably be talking about the latest thing that Donald Trump tweets, the latest outrage du jour, and not focus on a meeting that didn't go well. If you look at the meeting with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, it didn't go well. And what we saw from the White House was attempts to distract. And they're very successful at those attempts to distract.
Prophylactic tweeting is, I think, what Doug Heye is saying right there. That would be.
I did not use that word.
You're too nervous. I'll use it. David Gergen, I want to talk about this week, the importance of this week. Meeting with three key foreign leaders, Al-Sisi of Egypt, King Abdullah of Jordan, President Xi Jinping at the end of the week. What does President Trump need out of this week, David?
The most important meetings he has are at the end of the week with China. That's the most important relationship we have anywhere in the world. Two major powers, one rising, the other, it's been on top for a long time, but China's trying to challenge us. But there is, and John, in Mar-a-Lago, the possibility of laying the foundations for a major deal. The highest priority in international affairs for the Trump administration is to defang North Korea. And they really need China's help, more muscular help than anything we've seen so far to get that done. In exchange for that, the Chinese really want to avoid a trade war with Donald Trump in the United States. Remember, Trump promised back in the campaign a 45% tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States. That would touch off a trade war, and it's conceivably we could then stumble into something where some guns are going off, and that's to be avoided. From the Chinese point of view, they're a very status quo-oriented country. They'd really like to avoid that, so you can see the makings of a deal. One question I've got for you, for others. So Jared Kushner has been given responsibility for the Middle East in the Trump White House. He's now the chief road into from China. They're going through Kushner to get to the president. Why in the world is Jared Kushner in Iraq? I don't understand that.
Where and why is he doing a lot of what Secretary of State Rex Tillerson you would assume be doing? I mean, it is a fascinating background and color to all of this, Patty, as we bring you in the fact that Kushner met with Henry Kissinger, had him go over to China to meet with Xi ahead of this meeting. It is fascinating. You have said, sort of politics aside of your dislike of the president's politics, you think he comes into these meetings, especially the meeting with the Chinese president, from a position of weakness. How so?
Mm-hmm. Well, look, his favorability is in the 30s. He is under FBI investigation. He has lost his two big first initiatives, and that's his travel ban and then health care. He's a lot of talk, a tough talk. He's a lot of bluster, but he's going into these meetings in a very weakened position as the leader of the most powerful country in the world. He's meeting with the leader of arguably the second most powerful country in the world, and he comes at it in a weakened position. Also, there's no clear foreign policy coming out of this administration. We don't even know who's in charge, as David Gergen suggested. Is it Rex Tillerson? Is it Nikki Haley? Is it Jared Kushner? And still, as of yet, there is no Undersecretary for East Asian Affairs. So I think, yes, he's going into this meeting not only weakened, but probably ill-prepared.
You know, it's interesting, Doug. David brings up a good question about Jared Kushner, because there is this narrative out there that he's the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, you know, the prince, the alternative president, but he wasn't in town during the health care negotiations. Yep. He's not in town prior to the China meeting and prior to the meeting with El-Sisi. Maybe the narrative's wrong. Maybe this just proves that he's not as important, as much of a central player as some in the media like to say he is, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we all know the phrase palace intrigue, and there's no more intrigue with any other palace more than Donald Trump's White House right now. You know, whether we're talking about tweets, whether we're talking about a particular person and what their role may be, or other positions that haven't been filled, there's still a lot of questions out there, and at a certain point, hopefully we'll get some answers. I think the Trump White House would do itself well to start filling some of those positions so we get some more certainty. I think not just people talking on TV, but markets would get more certainty. Republicans on Capitol Hill would feel a lot better about how things were going.
David Gergen, too, the president was asked in this really fascinating, broad interview with the Financial Times this weekend about his tweets. And here's what he said: "I don't regret anything because there's nothing you can do about it." And then he said, "You know, if you issue hundreds of tweets and every once in a while you have a clinker, that's not so bad." I mean, that drives Mitch McConnell crazy. That drives a lot of Republicans and Democrats crazy. If you don't have a clinker, that's not so bad.
Well, a clinker like,
you're the president.
Well, that's right. Well, look, a clinker can go a long way. Just think of his claim that he'd been wiretapped by President Obama and a vicious attack on Obama. That has stirred up a lot of trouble for him. And Doug talked rightly about trying to create distractions, but some distractions you don't want. And I think that is a distraction that really got in his way. I also want to come back and respectfully disagree with the point about how weak the president is. Patty's absolutely right that he's weak at home right now. He's gone through a really rough period. We all know that. But the United States has such enormous power still in the world that any American president going into a meeting with China or anyone else still has great residual power, and you need to know how to use that and think about it. And I do think one of the questions that is over this, and Patty goes, I do agree with Patty on this, it's not clear what our strategy is toward China, especially on trade. There appears to be an epic battle within the White House, within the president's own camp, about whether to be really tough on China, go after, that's something Steve Bannon wants, or the Secretary of the Treasury, Gary Cohen inside the White House, the economist from Goldman Sachs. They want a more traditional, they don't want a trade war with China right now. It could jeopardize the growth that we have and the job progress we are making.
Patty, you want a quick last word?
Well, just on the tweets, I think, reading the interview this morning, it's just really unfortunate, and it's sort of, disheartening that this president has no regrets about the tweets that he has given, whether it's the wiretapping, whether it's the 3 million illegal votes, whether it's on a day where he should be working on the SCOTUS confirmation and his meetings with China. He's tweeting about a debate that happened in the election over a year ago. It's just, as I said, as a citizen, disheartening.
And John and Poppy, remember, Donald Trump may view a clinker very differently than you and I may. And that's the one thing that we still don't know in this White House.
Doug High, David Gergen, Patty Solis-Doyle, great to have you with us, guys. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
The Senate Judiciary Committee, they are meeting this morning in just a few minutes. They will have their first vote on Neil Gorsuch to be the next Supreme Court Justice. We're going to talk to a Democrat on that committee next. Big day on Capitol Hill. You're looking at live pictures from right now from inside the Senate Judiciary Committee. In just a few minutes, they will hold their final meeting and, in all likelihood, their final vote on Judge Neil Gorsuch, the president's pick to be the next Supreme Court Justice.
And before their roll call vote is even taken to advance this nomination, we could see more fireworks. We will see more fireworks from Democrats opposing this, like this moment from Gorsuch's confirmation hearing just last month.
Am I not also entitled to ask the question about whether we should be worried about the influence of dark money essentially corrupting our politics? instead of what I'm
Taking a lot of time to get what I would think would be a fairly simple answer.
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't think this is simple stuff at all, Senator. I think this is hard stuff.
Joining us now, one of the men in the middle of that exchange, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Nice to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, so you guys lost one of your fellow Democrats over the weekend. Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana became the third Democrat to say that he will vote to confirm Gorsuch. Here's part of why he's doing that. He says he is a qualified jurist who will base his decisions on his understanding of the law and is well respected among his peers. What about that statement do you think is wrong?
Well, obviously every member of the Senate Judiciary Committee has a different view coming out of the hearings that we held. The two things that drive me are the long series of 5-4 decisions with all the Republican appointees voting in favor of dark money, in favor of corporations over and over and over and over again. It's a disturbing array of partisan decisions. And the second relates to the clip that you showed. It actually is easy to say that dark money shouldn't be a factor in American elections. And the repeated inability of Judge Gorsuch to go there while so much dark money is being spent on his behalf, and as the appointee of a White House that is the beneficiary of an enormous amount of dark money contracts and spending. If you saw the New York Times today, you just got to make the sensible bet that he will saddle up and rebuild that 5-4 group and continue the dark money plague that has, I think, corrupted our democracy.
So, Senator, you talk a lot about dark money, and this is an area where you are quite passionate. You've written about it. Dark money, just so people know, has to do with unlimited money in politics now since the Citizens United decision that the Supreme Court made, equating political donations to free speech. Again, it all comes
unlimited, but also without knowing who the actual actor is in the play. Running
my question to you, Senator, is that was a Supreme Court decision, Citizens United. Are you basically saying you will never support any judge who doesn't actively oppose Citizens United?
I won't support any judge who doesn't understand that Citizens United has created a problem. Even Justice Kennedy has said it didn't turn out the way we expected, and even Justice Scalia said, don't blame us. Well, I'm blaming the court, but clearly he knows something is wrong when he's saying that the court shouldn't be blamed for it. There's absolutely no history with the Founding Fathers of how unlimited secret money should be allowed to influence our elections, and that should be an easy thing for a candidate to acknowledge.
But there's a lot of, and again, I want to move on from this, but there are a lot of judges who may think that decision was correct. There are people in the legal profession who do equate free speech with political donations. All I'm saying is that's a whole lot of judges you wouldn't support who might be on the other side of this.
Actually, I doubt it. If the judges track at all where the American public is on this, it's more like 85%. Think the decision is no good, think that it has ruined our politics, think that big money is corrupting our elections and government. This is a decision that has run smack into enormous public opposition that has continued since it was decided.
Senator, let me get your take on what we're likely to see, and that is the nuclear option being invoked here. Obviously, it's not something you'd like to see from Republicans. They point right back at you guys and they say, look at November 2013. You guys started this. If the Dems were in the same position, they would invoke the nuclear option. Are those Republicans wrong?
Well, you know, Mitch gets to make his decision about whether he wants to invoke the nuclear option or not. His candidate for this seat on the Supreme Court did not earn 60 votes. And in the past, that has meant that you change the candidate. His view is that you should change the rules, it seems. There may be some blowback in his caucus from that,
okay,
so
but
we'll
you know,
see whether
Democrats
something emerges.
are the ones who changed the rules on all of the lower court appointments starting in November
and we
2013.
specifically did not change it for the Supreme Court because of this concern. And by the way, nobody was happier than the Republicans that we didn't go that far. That was a consensus view that we should not go this far. But when you've got McConnell willing to deny Merrick Garland even a hearing, clearly he wants to claim this seat on the court. And as political a person as the majority leader of the Senate is, obviously he wants to claim it for political interests. And that's the concern we have about Gorsuch, is that he did not
distance himself at all from the political interests that are driving the court right now.
Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island.